The session, Can the Middle East Ever Be Liberal? We have two speakers deeply engaged with this topic, both with roots in the region and actively promoting liberal ideas. Faisal Al-Mutar is the founder of Ideas Beyond Borders. Born in Iraq, he faced threats due to his secular views and lost family members to extremist violence before arriving in the US as a refugee in 2013. His organization, Ideas Beyond Borders, works to counter extremism by translating and disseminating works of science, philosophy, and critical thinking into Arabic, aiming to empower individuals across the Middle East with access to diverse knowledge. Amjad is a policy fellow and a PhD candidate in economics at Ilmenau University of Technology in Germany, focusing on economic policy, institutional economics, and innovation economics. Originally from Syria, Amjad was until recently the leader of Students for Liberty team in Germany, and now serves as an economic advisor for Ideas Beyond Borders, creating educational content advocating for liberty, specifically for Middle Eastern audience. Please welcome Faisal Al-Mutar and Amjad Aoun.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you guys hear me well? I see a lot of familiar and unfamiliar faces. Thank you so much for attending an event about the Middle East. It's such a beautiful day, so I hope we're not going to depress you. And I'm glad the weather is good, so that way if you feel sad, you can have some beers and enjoy the weather. So I'm the founder from Ideas Beyond Borders. Give you kind of a brief about that and the history of how we started. Growing up in Iraq, I grew up primarily first, I would say, under the first regime of Saddam Hussein, where Iraq was kind of 1984, so pretty much everything, all sorts of information was controlled by one state actor, which is the government. And we had two media channels. One is controlled by Saddam Hussein himself, and the other one is controlled by his son, which is the Ba'ath Party, which was also, we're going to talk about that, in the Ba'ath Party of Syria. So these are the party that controlled both Iraq and Syria. And then, as you probably know, the multi-coalition forces led by the United States issued the war on Iraq, but I think the Czech Republic was also involved. And the idea was to remove Saddam Hussein and replace it with a liberal democracy. Well, the long story short, that didn't work out. So, and growing up with that, so Iraq, I would say, moved from what I call 1984 to Brave New World. So we transformed from one source of information to multiple sources of information, mostly funded by sectarian and regional actors, whether it's Iran or other players, that really kind of sectarianized and balkanized the entire country. So you can go from one neighborhood to another, and there is no agreement whatsoever on the truth. So we moved from one single version of the truth, pushed to us by the government, to chaotic, pretty much post-state actor, leading to a civil war that killed up to date more than 100,000 people, to say the least. Nobody knows actually how many people died in that civil war. It could be 1 million, it could be 100,000, really nobody knows. So in that kind of context, me and many of my colleagues at the time were trying to grapple with these really kind of tough ideas. And one of the first conclusions that actually led to the creation of Ideas Beyond Borders is that you cannot bomb democracy into countries. If there's one thing that really have failed within the Middle East context in particular, is that just because you topple that dictatorship and you remove that dictatorship, doesn't mean what's going to happen afterwards is a flourishing of liberal context or liberal ideas. So first we started a new project called the House of Wisdom 2.0, which used to be a house in Baghdad. It used to translate knowledge from different cultures and different countries into Arabic and the languages in the region. And that became kind of our main project that now has 8.5 million subscribers across the region, which actually shows that there is a hunger for liberal ideas, and they were communicated in a way that is that is smooth and that kind of understands the local context where people are operating. Then we start kind of applying these liberal ideas. We now have a fund that supports startups and entrepreneurship, so that people can actually see liberal ideas and kind of these values not in a kind of theoretical setting, but also something that they can apply in their daily lives and they can move them to prosperity. The third thing, in countries that are sympathetic to us, like the Kurdistan region of Iraq or even the federal government of Iraq, we start working on policy in terms of making it easier to register a business, etc. But in the kind of the geopolitical context, what if you hear the Middle East from a big picture, what you see is a lot of conflict, a lot of war, a lot of destruction, and that's also going to be kind of the theme to some extent of today. But with me I have Amjad, who's a Syrian economist and kind of an expert in a lot of these issues. But I'm going to start with the kind of the framing of this panel, because we kind of chose the name, is will the Middle East ever be liberal? Amjad, what do you think?
Well, that's a very hard question. Apparently that's why everyone's here. I can see that. Well, first of all, a while ago, me and my colleague Amy Panzer, we authored a paper. Well, it's an article. And we had the idea is that we had the same question: how can we spread liberty ideas in the Middle East? But then when we thought about it, it was like, well, we need to think about one step before that. How can we, in general, spread ideas in the Middle East? Because the soil is not fertile for divergence. The soil itself is not fostering any different discourse. For example, if I say liberalism, the perception is very different. I would say that people per se, they could like the ideas, but without actually understanding them. That's an issue there. So there's always a problem of communication that's going on there. And how to deal with it, this needs a lot of work. So if we look at, for example, the Aristotelian triangle of communication, we have pathos, ethos, and logos. And most of the time, we don't try to communicate in a way that they resonate with. So I think at House of Wisdom, with Hekman, we are doing that very good. One of the things we did is that we tried to make a comparison between Ibn Khaldun and Adam Smith. Ibn Khaldun had an idea, which is division of labor, but it was not as developed as Adam Smith, because Adam Smith goes further saying, okay, how does it function, what is the process, learning curves, specializing in a task, economies of scale, so he develops it. Ibn Khaldun had in a very simple way, he said, when people do different tasks, about the same goal, for example, farmers, one plow the field, the other plants, the third waters, then the output will be way more than what they need. But if one person tries to do everything, then the output will be not enough, even for that person. So when we made that video, it was very nice that actually people were motivated to read Adam Smith. But it's because social sciences are talkative. It's very hard to say who is the person who made the idea. Because, for example, I'm doing academia right now, we have discussions on a daily basis. I have an idea, my professor says something, I'm at a conference, someone else says something, it develops, and then one person articulates the idea. So basically when we say Adam Smith said this, it means he articulated it. For example, spontaneous order of Hayek, many people wrote about it, but he's the one who articulated it. He developed the whole argument very well. So I would say, also building on theme of currents, which is one of my favorite economists, the paper we authored, me and Emil, it was that we need to think how could we let ideas grow in the first place, how could people be encouraged to discuss things, to remove taboos. And the idea was that, well, we have preferences, we have expressive preference, or expressive utility, and then we have total utility made of three. And then the idea came to us, we should actually empower, for example, minorities or people who are already outsiders but within. So not outsiders from without, who are extremely different, but outsiders within, who share the culture, who know the status quo, who know everything, but they have different ideas. Their ideas might not be liberal per se, but encourage them to speak about it. It will change the distribution of the total utility, which would lead people to actually say their true preferences, and then we could kickstart the liberal discourse.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, I mean, I spent actually most of December in the United Arab Emirates. I was in both Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Now, I mean, I encourage everybody actually to go. It's pretty safe. But one of the things that I found very interesting was they built what is called the Abrahamic City. So now, if you go to Abu Dhabi, they built a church and a synagogue and a mosque just next to each other, and which people can actually visit the three holiest religions inside Arab Emirates, which was at the time very revolutionary, in which you can have these three things. I know we have a similar model in Jerusalem, but Jerusalem has a lot of surveillance cameras and it's a very militarized area. But if you go to Abu Dhabi, you actually you feel that's possible. And to add to that is that what I've also seen, I mean, one of the interesting things about, in addition to the theoretical examples of economic freedom, is that the Gulf states within the Middle East, the Middle East is divided into a lot of different regions. There's the Levant, which is kind of the Mediterranean area. There's the Gulf states, which is the Persian Gulf places. And there is a lot of actually successful examples of economic freedom being applied. I mean, now in Dubai, you can register a business in less than 10 minutes. They have 0% income tax. And that's the reason why a lot of Europeans actually now live in Dubai and live in these areas. The same can be applied right now in Saudi Arabia. There's actually a lot of vision. Many of these stuff are government-led, which is Vision 2030, in which they want to move towards privatization. So I think that I'll say that positive example we're seeing right now is that some countries in the region are applying a lot of the economic theories. But some criticism of that is that this is not, despite what Milton Friedman talked about, is that economic freedom leads to political freedom or leads to social freedom. What I have seen, at least within the region, is that when people reach a certain level of financial not freedom, but financial ability, is that the GDP per capita in the UAE is pretty high. Qatar is now the richest country in the world, so GDP per capita in the world is Qatar. But when people reach that level of wealth, they actually don't want to sacrifice it. And they don't want, because for them the concept of democracy and all of that stuff equals instability, equals chaos. Syria right now went through a transition. I think some people would not call it a democratic transition because there were tanks and it's definitely not the usual, it's not the Czech Republic style democratic transition. But how do you see Syria? Do you see there's any potential for or any form of political freedom in Syria and other places?
So I would say what we had before in Syria triggered, let's say, path dependence. So I would say having Assad in power means by default there's no hope. Now there is hope. Not the greatest, not the biggest, but there is hope because there's a change. Statistically speaking, unfortunately, countries that transition to democracies through revolutions are the few. Most of transitions toward democracy happen after negotiations between the government and the opposition. You can check that fact. So usually, the perfect scenario would be to have George Washington. I don't see the guy as George Washington, to be honest, sorry. Who would just win the revolution and then give some committee to rule for 5 years to get the structure of the formal institutions going on, and then just come and run for presidency. Who wins? It's democracy now. That's not the case probably there. But we can see that in Syria right now there's some sort of destitute and depletion in resources because it's been 14 years war. There are a lot of, let's say, troubles going on. There are de facto powers on ground. So I would say this could have potential that people are tired and bored, that they would push to find a solution. Either decentralized government,
he did talk about that, right? I mean, he did say that he wants to empower the private sector and kind of...
Yes, which is a very good thing. This is not the worst. The actions seem very volatile until now. We have seen some massacres going on. We have seen some issues. The peace or the stability is very fragile. It could explode at any moment. We are not sure of anything. But I would say if you have watched yesterday, I think it's yesterday or the day before, there was the meeting at the Security Council, and the whole world, for once, which is very good, because for once you see multiple powers at the Security Council saying that we need the resolution 2254. We need the participation of all Syrian people to build this new Syria. And I think this is a very good thing, because for the first time in the Syrian war, we have the international community unified on one discourse. So I hope this could be good.
I know you and I have some maybe disagreement on this, but like and there's a lot of challenges and opportunities in the Middle East, but one of the challenges a lot of people fly around is that many of the countries in the Middle East are fake. Is that they're fake in the sense that they were built post-World War I order. The Ottoman Empire was in charge of most of the region. The British and the French came in. This is Syria, this is Iraq, this is Lebanon. We saw that this actually got fractured. Our organization is called Ideas Beyond Borders, but ISIS also claimed that they are beyond borders and that the British. So we have a competitor, which is ISIS, which is not the easiest to fight, but is that they claim that, okay, many of these borders are fake, and I think one of their statements was, we want to kind of destroy the borders of the colonial forces, which is now, and when America came into Iraq in 2003, one of the ideas that was floated by Joe Biden at the time as a senator was Iraq need to be divided to 3 states. One is for the Shias, one is for the Sunnis, and one is for the Kurds. And I think there was an element of creating like a semi-autonomous Christian zone and etc. within that context. There's another argument now being created, is like, okay, should we redefine the borders of the Middle East in which we actually create new states that, because one of the reasons why, one of the arguments I think Bernard Lewis, who's a kind of professor at Princeton at the time, said is that the reason why dictatorships rise in most of the countries in the region is that because diversity is a curse. Like having somebody who can represent the entire different religious sections and different ethnic groups is almost impossible. So you need a very strong man who can be able to kind of control everything. And that's what led to the rise of Saddam Hussein and the rise of Assad. I'm actually on the fence, like I don't necessarily adhere to the concept of that one strong state is necessary, but you have a lot of thoughts on that. Is that, do you see the future of the Middle East being more decentralized with small states instead of having these massive states that cannot really control? Nobody has figured out how to control Iraq or Syria or all these places.
So from an economic perspective, it is always to have a decentralized structure because governance becomes easier, more effective. We have seen, for example, in Syria, it was centralized government. The government was so strong, but we have seen critical discrepancies in development between, for example, if you look at cities like Aleppo and Damascus, very developed, well established, and then if you go to other places like Deir ez-Zor, Raqqa, you see that they are very much underdeveloped. Although, so the funny part is that Deir ez-Zor, Raqqa, they have most of the oil fields, so they are the actual rich places, but they didn't get many. The issue I see in Syria at least is that if you want to have a decentralization based on ethnicity or religion, that could be a little bit problematic because there is no region that is 100% pure of that ethnicity. You will always have individuals from different ethnicities. Then what will happen, in my opinion, not sure, but in my opinion, I think this will lead to the majorities always oppressing the minorities, and they will push them out, and then you will end up with this two or small states nearing each other but hating each other, and then the violence will not stop. But at the end, economically speaking, if you look at Syria, this economically is not viable. I'm with federalism, I do support it, but based on political perspective, not ethnicity or religion. So if you look at Western Syria, the coastal line, it's majority Alawites, but you have, for example, Christians, you have Sunnis, you have Ismailis, you have different minorities living there. Each individual should have, of course, the right. There should be the rule of law. Their properties should be always protected. So it becomes a political region and not, let's say, Alawite region, Sunni region, Christian region. In that perspective, yeah, I'm with decentralization, but if it's based on like, this is for Christians, this is for Muslims, this is for something, I see it not viable to a certain extent, but I don't know, that's my opinion at least.
Do you see, actually, I mean, I received that question before, and I also don't have an answer to it, is that, and I mean, I'm from a European country, so probably I might be corrected here, is that one of the reasons why Enlightenment values or liberal ideas spread within Europe was a lot of it to do with civil wars that existed within Europe between the Protestants and the Catholics and people burning each other alive because of different religions. I don't know if that's the accurate theory of how Enlightenment came to be. We are having the same thing in the Middle East right now. We had civil wars based on ethnic, religious backgrounds, Sunnis versus Shias, etc. Do you see that creating a spark for a new enlightenment or a new kind of liberal-oriented thinking in the region?
So I would say, of course, it's not the civil war per se, it's destitute people living in deflation for a long time. They actually, like for example, many people in Syria would oppose an Islamist faction coming into power. If you ask them 20 years ago, they'd say, hell no. But right now, after 14 years, GDP has been destroyed. UN estimations that the cost of rebuilding Syria exceeds $400 billion. Some estimations say even more. People just want to live, so they have reached the level that doesn't matter. We just want to live. Anything. We want to have international connections. We want to have free trade. We want to have businesses opening.
So it's creating a fertile ground for, because that's what we're seeing right now with a lot of. I mean, another follow-up on that is that, I mean, also within kind of Western context, and is that some people believe, especially within the conservative side of the aisle, is that, well, the West and the Middle East are very different. The West is Christian, and Christianity is more prone to kind of liberal ideas, however defined. Do you see that argument to be true? Number one, and if yes, and why? Do you think that there is actually a difference between the Islamic world and how it accepts these ideas compared to the Christian, I know Judeo-Christian is all of the US, but like within the West?
I would say on the individual level, there aren't many differences. But on the, let's say, organizational level, there are differences. Because there's some path dependence, there are laws related, for example, to inheritance. So in the West, the wealth of the family was allowed to be accumulated into the hands of one inherent, which basically did not dissolve the whole organization of the business. While the organization or the institution in the Middle East, at least like in some areas, is that there's more egalitarian distribution. Like this needs to get that, this needs to get that, and it's a law. And this led historically to dissolving too many wealth or a lot of money going to multiple people. And this prevented somehow the creation of corporations, creations of strong civil society. This has led to this. So, as I said, on the institutional level, there are differences, but the organization, let's say, but on the individual level, I don't see anyone who would say, no, I don't want to have my business, I don't want to do a great job. Or probably there are outliers, people out there, but I'm saying if we have a correlation, we have a regression, we ask this question, I don't think if you ask anywhere in the world, people, the majority will be telling you, no, I hate prosperity, I hate having good life, I hate healthcare, I hate being able to save my loved ones because we are a very wealthy nation, we can provide this cure or that cure. So on the individual level, I see no difference to be honest.
How about on, I mean, you said like kind of the word liberalism has kind of a bad connotation in the region. I mean, I think not to make joke of it, but like the first time I heard the word liberalism was from a religious scholar, and he was saying that liberalism is going to lead all your kids to be trans and your women to be prostitutes. So do you see kind of the social elements of liberalism, which I challenge. I mean, I live in the United States. In the United States, if you go to Alabama, they're not fans of liberalism either. So it's not just necessarily a Middle Eastern issue, but it's. Do you see kind of the economic freedom? I think 1,000,000% agree, and we can already see success story of Dubai and success story of the Gulf states in which they have a very strong private sector. They allow to register businesses very easily. How about the other elements of liberalism when it comes to kind of what I think the West considers democratization, civil society, the role of that? Do you see that have the same potential of flourishing as the economic side? Because I know you started a new project in Syria, but so are you focusing on these other issues, or are you starting with the economic side only?
Right now we're focusing on the economic side because other issues are luxurious when people cannot find food. That was our main goal. But when it comes to liberalism, I would say even if you read for Hayek, or if you read the history of Western philosophy, so the idea of individualism was not actually popular. So many historians or philosophers looked at individualism as, or at least like Auguste Comte says, it's the perennial Western malady, the revolt of the individual against the species. So they looked at it like it's destroying the society, it's turning people into being selfish, they want to kill each other, they don't care about each other. And Hayek says, well, it's actually counterintuitive when we look at liberty, because it's very hard to convince people that, when you let the other people do what they like, it's going to be good for you too. They're going to invent stuff, they're going to innovate stuff, they're going to find cool things for you too. It's counterintuitive. So Hayek says that what happened after those ideas have been developed in the intellectual sphere, it was a long time for the spread of these ideas into the public. So the public took the ideas and started experimenting with them to see do they actually work, are we actually going to be better off, and it turned out that they were. In the Middle East, this has never happened yet. We are trying to. IBB is one of the very scarce voices who are trying to do this. It didn't happen yet on a big scale. I think when it happens on a big scale, that when people actually understand this counter-intuition, then they will be the ones actually calling for politicians like, no, you know what? You're not going to be there forever. No, it's going to be 2 terms, 4 years each, that's it. Hopefully we could reach that time, but we need to do a lot of work.
Yeah, I mean, in Iraq, which my country director is here, one of the reasons there was a rise of even secular-oriented political parties, which we have right now, and some of them win parts of the parliament, is that they came a post-Civil War, is that we don't want theocracy because it's good for me not to have theocracy because I am from a different sector, I'm from a different religion. And when they saw kind of the effect of collectivist or totalitarian form of religious theocracy, they became more cautious of this. I don't know how much time we actually have for Q&A, but
17 minutes.
Huh?
17 minutes.
Oh, we have 17 minutes, so we have only 2 minutes left before the Q&A, right? Or we have 17 minutes until the Q&A?
17 minutes in total.
In total, okay. So do you have questions for me?
Yes, actually I do have one question for you. Yesterday we were walking in Prague, and I was with Faisal and some other friends with as well, and they were telling me about free radio or Radio Free Europe.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested if you could elaborate a little bit to join the story to share the story with everyone here.
Sure, so I'm sure everybody here is familiar with Radio Free Europe. So that is one of the programs. It started post-Cold War by the U.S. Agency for Global Media in the U.S. And the idea was to kind of separate, using government money or taxpayer money to separate the values of freedom into the Iron Curtain. And America built something similar for the region, which is called the U.S. Agency for Global Media, Middle East Broadcasting Network. I don't know if you have heard the news, but there was something showed up called Doge. And these agencies got doged, which is either a combination of complete dissolvement or kind of cutting of the entire staff. And I mean, Ideas Beyond Borders to some extent is a replacement to that because we're a private organization. that aims to do that without utilizing government sources. But I think that to some extent that the backfire that happened as a result of that, of the cutting, and I know we're a libertarian audience, so they might be all for 100% for Doge, but one of the negative implications, I will say, of how the whole thing was handled, of how Radio Free Europe is number one, Elon Musk tweeting that every US agency, global media, was a criminal, was definitely not a good idea. Because I don't see authoritarian states like Russia, like China, calling their employees criminals in front of the whole world. And I think what it also signaled, and I know it's a cut of a government program, but it also signaled is that the United States, which claim to be the leader of the free world, is signaling that we don't care about these values. So I think it's definitely an opportunity for us as an organization to replace a corrupt, I mean, many of these institutions are corrupt. Many of the US money that went into these institutions, like Radio Free Europe, even though there's a lot of studies that show that Radio Free Europe, and I'm sure many of the audience here are much familiar, we're actually kind of successful in supporting some of the freedom initiatives across Europe. But in the Middle East, the stories of corruption are very high. But I think I'm also worried about a moment where places like Europe and places like the United States that have the values of freedom suddenly calling the people who work for it a criminal organization. So it's really kind of the irony. But I'm really interested to talk to everybody here to see what they think of that. But we also have a call for interns and data, especially the students here. One of the things we're very interested in is understanding public opinion, public sentiments. We have by now received 1 billion views to all of our content, from video to podcasts and all of that stuff. And we really want to understand more and more what resonates and what doesn't, utilizing science and data analytics. So if there's any students here in that kind of space, that will be wonderful, especially students who are interested in media and communication. And this is a global fight for freedom. I mean, in a way, there's always a quote that if you make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. And I think the reverse happens in the Middle East, that if Middle East becomes free, which is I think the most difficult region that can ever become free, maybe it can have an effect for everyone else in the world. Thank you all for attending. I'm looking forward for your questions. Thank you so much.
It was really interesting.
Thank you.
My first question is, many people consider Israel as the most liberal country in the Middle East and the only democratic country in the Middle East. And my question is, how would you rate Israel under liberal values? What are your thoughts on Israel? And my second question is, can you be a strong Muslim who follows all ideas of mainstream Islam and be at the same time classical liberal, especially concerning the topics women's rights, rights of homosexuals and freedom of speech?
Let's split that, or well, I mean, in terms of kind of rating of liberalism, and one of the things that we follow as an organization is the Freedom House. The Freedom House does a lot of amazing research on the rise of freedom and decline of freedom around the world. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Israel moved from free to partially free, which is somewhere in between closed society and open society. So it's somewhere in between. That I think part of it because Sheldon Adelson from the United States bought a lot of the Israeli media, which made Israel media to be more biased towards one view or the other. By comparison, yes, it has more freedom in some political sides compared to the rest of the region. That being said, and one of the things that I'm witnessing a lot within the region, if I'm not mistaken, the UAE right now allows unmarried couples to be in apartments and hotels and things like that. So there is a lot of movements towards social freedoms within the Gulf states. Tunisia, to some extent, also has a high rate of social freedom. So that, I think we're progressing in the right direction. The homosexuality subject, I think, will be a bit controversial for a period of time, but I see it kind of progressing especially in places that became more economically connected. So one of the things that I'm monitoring a lot of what's happening in Saudi Arabia, and with Saudi Arabia, because they are oil country, one of the things they've always had was because we're oil rich, we don't need to be connected to the rest of the world. Because people need oil, they have to come respect our values, they need our money. MBS showed up, who was Mohammed bin Salman, and he had a vision in 2030, which is we have to move away from oil. And by being moved away from oil, we need to have foreign investors, we need to have people around the world coming in. What did that result to? More openness towards women's rights. Now, within the past 2 years, I believe, women are allowed to drive, all the religious police was all dismantled. And I think there is definitely a connection between not necessarily just economic freedom, but the whole concept of globalization is that when the markets become globalized in a certain Middle Eastern country, then women investors are going to come, women workers are going to come. You cannot put all the restrictions that used to be in the past. So I think socially the Middle East, at least in countries who are getting globalization, and possibly Syria as a result of the conflict, they might become more open. In terms of the kind of the compatibility of the theological concept, which is the Islamic faith, the Islamic religion, and that, as I mentioned, I mean, all of these countries are Muslim majority countries, and they are moving in that direction. And I think that there is a very vibrant debate within Islamic theology, at least I mean, within the Sunni tradition, you have the Hanafis and the Shafi'i and Hanbali and all of that stuff. And that over decades have led to the rise of one faction over the other. During the Cold War, the kind of the Hanbali or the Salafi jihadist tribe was common. They have controlled parts of Iraq and Syria under the rule of ISIS. That failed, obviously, so a lot of people have resentment towards that. However, the more, because I don't like to use the word moderate and extreme, because that's a very bad way of looking at the religion through that lens. Because the people who are moderate don't call themselves moderate, they call themselves religious. So I think it's very important not to go through that rabbit hole of moderate versus extreme. But in terms of like how compatible it is with more openness towards the world, we're seeing, I would say and argue that there is actually a very big rise of that. And the fact that Saudi Arabia, which has the holy sites of Mecca and Medina, is moving towards a path of openness on a lot of sort of things, signals to the rest of the Muslim world. Because there's no country that I think has a significant influence in the region as much as Saudi Arabia. It is the holiest site within Islam. It has people from all over the Muslim world visit it every year for Hajj, for pilgrimage. So I think the signal from Saudi Arabia has a lot of influence, and I think I know Amjad probably one of the interesting things actually we can mention also about Israel and is that because of boycott and because of that, there is no elements of Israel coming to the region because there's no media, there's no interaction. So that in a way, I was expecting that Turkey would play a major influence during the Ataturk years. I think because of language barriers, that also didn't have influence. So really, the most influential country in the region culturally is Saudi Arabia, and by extension, the United Arab Emirates. And I think their rise towards more openness actually can lead to a lot of things happening in the region. And I'm going to look for anything.
I think he concluded everything.
I think we have a gentleman.
Yes, my co-author Amjad gave you the institutional part of the explanation. I'm going to give you a little bit of the philosophy part because he didn't answer that completely. So philosophers like to call liberal tolerance a minimal but hard virtue. What does that mean? Minimal is because you don't need to like a person to tolerate them. You don't need to accept their ideas to tolerate them. You can think they have a punchable face. You just don't punch them. Right?
That's very difficult.
You coexist, and that's very difficult. Why is it difficult? Because people are afraid of living in a society dominated by people who are not like them, right? Religious people are afraid that society will be dominated by non-religious people. Secular people will be afraid that they will exist in a society dominated by non-secular people. So the innovation of liberalism is that the solution here was basically you don't need society to cohere on an answer. You just need to coexist, right? And it developed partially through experience, so through the 30 years wars, and the carnage there, where people decided, okay, let's stop fighting for a while over who dominates society. But also just through institutions where we don't solve conflicts, but we manage them. We turn them into debates instead of straightforward fights. And those sorts of institutions were really lacking, or were actually prevented from being developed in the Middle East on purpose, through co-optation and through different mechanisms that Amjad proposed. So really, we need to develop a sort of institutional understanding of tolerance there, but also an opinion-based understanding of tolerance, that it doesn't involve you giving up your religion to live in a different society, or giving up your secularism. It simply involves living together.
Thank you.
There you go.
Very interesting to hear you say that redraw the borders. I've never heard about that. That made me think if redraw the borders is by force, like India and Pakistan, is a disaster. But on the other hand, some other spontaneous order redraw the border, like Czechoslovakia or
the Balkans.
Yeah, the Balkans, former Yugoslavia, and also Singapore and Malaysia. It's a good thing, but on the other hand, Ukraine and Georgia, because the border drawn and one side wasn't happy about it, then they come backfire. So it's, I don't know, what do you see the future of if it really happened?
You mean in Syria per se? Or
You said the whole Middle East.
the whole Middle East?
Yeah, he was.
It was Faisal.
Yeah, I mean, I would call myself a proponent of the idea, but it definitely has been floating around even within the. I mean, how would it happen would depend exactly. I mean, I think the conversations changes a lot when you have a successful country, right? I mean, there's a correlation, for example, between the Kurds want to separate from Iraq when it's good days versus bad days. When it's bad days, nobody will want to be part of Iraq. When it's good days, everybody will want part of Iraq. So I think if we continue on a trajectory that I'm envisioning to the region, but also I see to some extent happening, of more of the region becoming more prosperous. I mean, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia has said that I sound like I'm propagandist Saudi Arabia or not, but he said that the future is in the Middle East. It's one of the most useful regions in the world. It has a lot of resources. If we only get the security part right, we're doing pretty well, right? Like that's if we only get the security part well, there's safety and there's stability. There's a high potential for it to be prosperous. If that becomes the case, I see less possibility of division. However, if we continue on the opposite trajectory, which is what a lot of extremists want, then everybody would be, okay, why am I being part of this country? If I am separate ethnically, if I'm separate this, then all of these things get fermented very easily. And then we have to consider the question that, okay, if these countries cannot coexist in what it is, then maybe it's the solution is to separate them. And that's going to sometimes happen in a war conflict, obviously in a civil war, and the Druze get bored, or it happens through a democratic means of a country, kind of like the Singapore model of like a group of generals deciding they want to separate and they call the night. These two things can happen, and I think the next 30 years we'll see which direction it's going to lead. But what I'm personally working, and IDSB is working to make prosperity the norm. So prosperity becomes the norm, I see less likelihood of these countries being divided. I think we have 1 minute, or
we can have one more quick question.
Make it the most interesting question of the whole year. No pressure.
So you're both saying that you acknowledge the fact that you can't bomb liberal ideas into people, and then you say also that liberalism has very bad connotations in the region, both the term and the ideology. And you, as I hear you, forget to mention why that is. It's not only because we're not very open to extreme religiousness, it's also because they see us as self-righteous and as imperialists, and they don't want us to force them into having our ideas when they have their own ideas themselves. So your response to them not wanting our imperialism is, let's just make a new form of imperialism where we start by maturing them, so to speak, by presenting them to different ideas within their own culture, and then maybe in the future they will also be open to liberal ideas when we propose them to them. And I don't really see how you can call that very liberal or very free. I don't see it as a free choice you want to give them. I see it only as self-righteousness and indoctrinating or manipulating people into having our ideas when they obviously don't want them. So how can you defend forcing your own ideas and basically wanting to rule the whole world and defend that within liberalism and freedom of choice?
We're definitely not forcing anyone to adhere to our ideas. People come very voluntarily to join our organization. We don't have any guns that I know of. Maybe my team, some of them might have some warehouses that I'm not familiar with, but they don't show up on my invoices, so I don't know. And I totally agree with you that we've had one of our main messages that I think have worked, and I'll give you the final word, is that these ideas are good because they work. It's as simple as that. Economic freedom leads to prosperity. Freedom as a concept leads to better coexistence and less conflict. Evidence has shown that for decades, and I think that some of that have history within the region, and Amjad can talk more about that, and some of them may need to be adapted from different regions, but I think that we are definitely not forcing anybody to adhere to our Bible of liberty.
Just to add a small thing about the manipulation part. So we're dealing with human beings. So historically, even when we look at consumers in Europe, there are two schools of thought. One of them would be looking at consumers that are gullible, they cannot make their own decisions, or they are private entities and they have the right to basically manage their own lives. We can derive two different policies out of each school. If we look at consumers as dumb, basically, then we get a paternalistic state. And then who says that what the state policy is the correct thing? So that's, I would say, there's a big paradox here, because it's very hard to define what is manipulation, what is not. The only thing is that we should make sure that when people are adopting these ideas, they are doing it voluntarily. No one is holding a gun at their head, no one is threatening them, they have the alternative, but still they decided to adopt these ideas because they want the outcomes. What we're doing is that I wouldn't say manipulating, I would say clarifying, because I would say the others, like the empirics, prove that with freedom of free markets, you get more prosperity, you create more wealth. If there is a distribution issue, you can have policies about that. But empirically speaking, by statistics, nothing creates more wealth than using the local knowledge the best way. What is the coordination system, the coordinating system that gives us the best, most efficient way to allocate resources? It's markets. There are two other forms you can choose, models. One is basically anything goes, so everyone produces, and then people hold guns, kill each other to consume more, to steal others, and then, unfortunately, the people who are weak, who cannot defend themselves, they will lose the incentive to produce. Another thing we have is the central planning system to coordinate also the allocation of resources. But in that case, we are saying that the person who's sitting in the center, who's planning everything, this person is superior to others, that this person can tell that I need to be an engineer and not an economist, even though this person doesn't know what I like, what I don't like, am I good at mathematics or not, what do I do? And then they could use, for example, data from my grades at school, but then I could be sick on the economics exam day and I get a bad grade. But that's local knowledge, and there are millions of people. Is this person going to know the story, the life story of each individual? I guess not. So we go to the third model we have to allocate resources, which is markets. Is it 100% perfect? Unfortunately, in real life, we have nothing that is 100% perfect, otherwise we wouldn't have economics, we wouldn't try to study these things, because we would say, resources are not scarce, they are unlimited, then why do we care? We wouldn't care. So that's what we're trying to do. We clarify this idea. At the end of the day, if they decide, oh, we don't want markets, we want to kill each other, then I'm sorry, I'm not part of this, but I cannot force you. It's your job to decide. My job is just to show you the consequences of each model.
So time is up. Don't forget that in 25 minutes, here in Borovsky room starts last breakout. This time it is about Ukraine as a front line of the fight for liberty. So great to see you here.